Right now, American Tomahawks are striking right at the heart of Russia. Putin is in a panic. Washington is switching to turbo mode. America is ready to crush the Russian Federation. This is a blow to the Kremlin that Putin will not survive. Shock. Ukraine is taking the initiative into its own hands. Unexpectedly, they came for Lukashenko. Belarus is on the verge of collapse. They've decided to finish off the Russian world in Transnistria, and the Ukrainian Armed Forces will help Moldova. Neighbors are under Kyiv's protection. Russia's cold death. People are freezing right in their apartments. A utilities apocalypse against the backdrop of war. Pipes are bursting, budgets are melting away, people are dying. China is on fire. The uprising against Xi is gaining momentum. The country is on the brink of civil war. The army is in a panic. Repression has swept across the Celestial Empire. Shock. A military explosion in China could upend the strategy of the war in Ukraine. Shocking details. Coming soon? NATO is collapsing. Europe is building an alliance without the US. Ukraine is at the center of the game. Without the Yankees, but with Kyiv, the EU is searching for new strength. NATO 2.0. Ukraine gets a VIP pass to the military revolution. Sensational. Gerasimov has pleased Putin once again. Kupiansk has been liberated again. But there's a little nuance. Russia is in a panic. The reality of the Russian Armed Forces report and the actual war do not match. The fantastic lies of Russian generals are now shocking even the Kremlin. When will the Russian military elite finally be shown the door? All this and more coming up in our episode of Hotspot. In Washington, an influential group of staunch Ukraine supporters is up in arms, demanding one thing: to strike. To hit the Kremlin so hard that Putin himself is forced to sit down, preferably at the negotiating table. Their main idea? American Tomahawks straight to the heart of the enemy. A decision is just around the corner. More on how the United States continues to support Ukraine and wear down Russia coming up.
Tomahawks for the Armed Forces of Ukraine, a new U.S. strategy to pressure the Kremlin. Washington is discussing a plan to strike deep into Russia to force Putin to make peace.
It is unlikely that we will be able to incorporate any new elements here.
A small group of Ukraine's supporters in Washington claims that the only way to force the Russian dictator to the negotiating table is to significantly strengthen Kyiv's position, and this can be done with the help of Tomahawk missiles.
As last year's experience showed, as soon as the United States even mentioned Tomahawk missiles, immediately Putin began to display the highest level of constructiveness, or rather constructive behavior, and tried in every possible way to show that he wanted peace. But as soon as Putin realized that Ukraine would not be getting any Tomahawk missiles, that was it. After that, the campaign to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure and terrorize Ukrainian cities began.
At the center of this initiative is Dan Rice, president of the American University in Kyiv and former special advisor to the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, who met with the U.S. Secretary of Defense, according to Kyiv Post.
Putin only responds to strength. If he does not agree to peace, then in my opinion, there is a high likelihood that President Trump will approve the use of Tomahawks.
Rice refused to disclose the details of the meeting, calling most of the conversation confidential. However, he did reveal what exactly he proposed. According to him, he directly asked the Secretary of Defense to provide Ukraine with Tomahawks, even if it was a small, undisclosed number.
Even if they give us 20, 30, or 50 missiles, it won't make much of a difference. We need hundreds of missiles per month to have at least some kind of leverage over the Russian Federation. And here are the latest figures. The Russians launch per month about 300 different missiles at Ukraine each month. We should be launching at least as many, preferably more. Only then can we really put pressure on the Russian Federation.
Ukraine has been trying to get these missiles from the US since Biden's term in office. But up to now, Tomahawks have still not been supplied to the Ukrainian army.
It is believed, again we don't know for sure, but rumor has it, online sources say that the United States can produce about 100 missiles per year. 100 missiles per year. So for the average person, it might seem, well, 100, that sounds like a lot, right? 100 missiles, that's a lot. But let's look at it from another angle. The cost of each missile, according to various estimates, could be $2 million per missile, or even $4 million, as for example, when the Americans once sold them to Japan. So for themselves, it's a little over 2 million, but for the Japanese, it was 4.25 million per missile. In other words, these are large sums. It would seem that if money isn't the issue, then the problem lies in the quantity.
Therefore, whether Trump will approve the supply of Tomahawks remains an open question. While some officials believe that American missiles could indeed become a lever of influence on Russia during negotiations, others fear that the transfer of Tomahawks, on the contrary, will undermine diplomatic efforts.
if the United States had clearly stated that if Russia destroys Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Ukraine would receive them. A Tomahawk missile, I guarantee that nothing like what is happening now would have occurred. But the United States has a different approach. They are trying to persuade Putin in a friendly way to maintain good relations with him and everything along those lines. Therefore, to be honest, I don't really believe that the United States under Trump would give Ukraine a Tomahawk missile.
Let us recall that American Tomahawk cruise missiles have the capability to store up to 15 pre-programmed targets in their memory, and they can change their target destination directly in flight, as well as carry either nuclear or conventional warheads.
Urgent. Lukashenko's dictatorship is on the verge of collapse, and the Russian occupation of Transnistria is falling apart at the seams. Ukraine is protecting its neighbors and breaking the Kremlin's chains. Kyiv's shocking moves are truly changing the map of Moscow's influence. Details coming up.
Lukashenko, the so-called president, is not recognized as legitimate by Ukraine or other EU countries. Today's Belarus has lost its sovereignty and has turned into a Russian governorate. The Lukashenko regime, and he personally, must be held accountable for their complicity in Russian aggression. Ukraine's position towards its neighbors was voiced in a major interview with European Pravda by the head of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, Andriy Sybiha.
We believe that the time will come and Belarus, democratic Belarus, will become the fourth participant in the Lublin Triangle. Right now, I have received instructions from the President to appoint a special representative, and in the near future, I will submit a candidate for consideration. We are still determining the title for this position, but it will be an official who has the authority to engage with the democratic forces of Belarus.
Just recently, during a visit to Lithuania, Volodymyr Zelensky's team made what was essentially a diplomatic move. For the first time, they publicly established contact with the so-called government in exile. In front of television cameras, the Ukrainian president met with the head of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya. A third of the speech delivered by the Ukrainian president in Lithuania was dedicated to Belarus. On Tikhanovskaya's social media pages, the description of the meeting included not only praise for Zelensky but also for Kyrylo Budanov, in the context of the assistance provided by Ukrainian special services for the release of Belarusian political prisoners in mid-December 2025. The Ukrainian president invited Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya to Kyiv. When the visit will take place is still unknown.
This was a politically calculated move that was meant to be heard. We, those of us who want Belarus to be democratic and what the regime in Minsk needed to hear.
But it wasn't just the meeting in Vilnius. Alarming signals to the regime in Minsk also came from the heart of Kyiv. On the 11th anniversary of the death of Belarusian Mikhail Zhiznovsky, who was one of the first to die on the Maidan in 2014, a march of Belarusians took place through the center of the Ukrainian capital. In memory of Mikhail and all compatriots who defended Ukraine's freedom from Russian occupiers. Not,
I don't want to, not here, not ever, not by anyone, not to the heroes, glory, glory, glory.
In addition, the SBU announced the exposure of a KGB agent who had been recruited by Belarusian special services back in 2015. The woman worked at one of the TV channels belonging to Putin's crony. In 2020, she was sent to Ukraine again, where she got a job at one of the national media outlets. The SBU published fragments of conversations between the detainee and her Belarusian handlers, as well as her attempts to recruit a member of the Ukrainian Defense Forces.
This isn't the KGB, it's the former Naraz. No one else in this life will ever touch me. Personally, that's good for me. No one will touch you. That's simply under all sorts of guarantees. These are all my personal matters and so on. No one will touch you. If that's
how it works, then that's how it works. That's not how it works. With your 10 years of experience, that should have been clear already.
The SBU subtly hinted to Minsk that they were aware of the agent's trips to Europe and her assignments in Ukraine, and that the vast majority of her reports are fake.
SBU and GOR officers began a prolonged operational game with the Belarusian agent, which allowed them to document her every move and, with her help, regularly mislead the Belarusian intelligence service.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, without going into details, clarifies that Belarus is now introducing new elements of support for Russian aggression. Ukrainians are legally documenting every episode in order to raise the issue of imposing sanctions in the future. Recently, Ukrainian authorities have been speaking out more loudly not only about the future of Belarus, but also of Moldova. The head of Ukrainian diplomacy, when asked whether Kyiv is considering providing military assistance to its neighbors for the deoccupation of Transnistria, emphasized that this remains the prerogative of Chisinau. But in both countries, it is becoming increasingly clear that Russian troops on this territory pose a threat to the national security of both Moldova and Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
An icy apocalypse is engulfing Russia. Russians are freezing. In dozens of regions, people are on the brink of extinction due to a utilities collapse. Pipes are bursting, there's no money, and the budget is melting away on the war with Ukraine. No one is saving, nor will anyone save people from sub-zero temperatures in their apartments. A cold death awaits just beyond the Moscow Ring Road. More on the nightmare of Russian everyday life ahead.
This is a lesson in an ordinary school in Murmansk. There's no electricity and children are forced to study by flashlight.
This isn't Herbalife. It's worse than a gadget. We're learning by candlelight. And
this is how local residents have to keep warm and cook food over a fire since the city has been without electricity for almost a week. The cities of Murmansk and Severomorsk, with a combined population of over 300,000 people, spent a week without electricity or heating. The reason wasn't Ukrainian drones. People were pushed to the brink of survival because 5 power line pylons collapsed 7 kilometers from Murmansk. The large-scale accident happened due to improper maintenance.
According to the Russian Investigative Committee, the pylons fell due to untimely maintenance. 2 of them had been in operation since 1966. Another 2 since 1982. 1 since 1988. This was clarified by the Investigative Committee. At the same time, the service life is only 40 years. After that, a technical inspection is required every 5 years. Of the pylons. The agency ruled out any third-party impact on the infrastructure.
That's it. The utilities infrastructure was put into operation back in the Soviet era. Wear and tear is at 60, 70, even 80%. In large cities, it's a bit less because money is allocated and invested there. Moscow is a separate region. It receives more funding. And the farther a city is from the center, the less investment it gets specifically in the utility sector. So little money was allocated to utilities before, and now it's being cut even further.
But this is far from an isolated incident. For example, in December, there were already several accidents on the heating networks in the Altai region. During repairs, more than 500 apartment buildings were left without heating. The main cause of the emergency is the high level of wear and tear on the heating networks. During these days, the air temperature dropped to minus 28 degrees.
The pipeline rupture in Rubtsovsk added to the list of major utility accidents that have become more frequent in Russia since the start of winter. On December 25th, 17,000 residents of Serov in the Sverdlovsk region and 85,000 residents of Saratov were left without heat. On December 15th, an accident at the CHP plant led to the shutdown of hot water and heating for more than 400,000 residents. Rostov-on-Don. The same thing happened on December 7th in Angarsk-Irkutsk region. At that time, 167,000 residents were left without heat.
Problems with electricity and heating also occurred in St. Petersburg. In January alone, heating was lost at least 5 times in different districts of the city. In
St. Petersburg, electricity went out at night in the Krasnogvardeyski district, and in the Krasnoselsky district, more than 20 buildings were left without heating, due to an accident on the worn-out heating network. Some residents also lost hot water while it was below freezing outside. According to
official Rosstat data from 2015 to 2021, the level of wear and tear on the power grid increased by 1.5 times, from 40% to 65%. And by the end of 2024, the average wear across all networks had already reached 72%. Severe wear and tear has led to a huge number of accidents. In the first year of the war in Ukraine, the accident rate in Russia's distribution power grid increased by more than 58%. The reason is the lack of money for repairs. The money is being spent on the war.
There is a monstrous underinvestment in housing and utilities. We have a monstrous lack of investment in all energy structures. So periodically, when accidents occur in certain settlements, it suddenly turns out at that moment that there's a heating plant there that hasn't been repaired since Soviet times or something else like that. Starting from 1990, basically, throughout all this time, investment in all this infrastructure, whether energy or electrical, has been insufficiently funded.
To avoid such accidents in the housing and utilities sector, about 10 trillion rubles need to be invested in Russian infrastructure. That is exactly the amount the Kremlin spent on financing the war in Ukraine in 2025. This figure comes from a report by Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, presented in December of last year. But it is unlikely that the money for the war will be redirected to improving the lives of Russians. After all, for Putin, the war with Ukraine is much more important.
Political turmoil in China. Generals rebelled against Xi. The country is nearing civil war. Mass purges, repressions, disappearances. The PRC is coming apart at the seams. Could events in China blow up the strategy for the war in Ukraine? Shocking details. Coming up next. Xi Jinping is purging the ranks of his generals, suspected of attempting a coup and overthrowing Xi himself. One of the largest and most alarming anti-corruption campaigns during Xi Jinping's rule is unfolding in China.
There are indeed a lot of factors at play. The military is involved, as well as nuclear weapons and the transfer of information to the United States. Honestly, Xi Jinping's right-hand man is being accused. This concerns military matters and his colleagues within the military hierarchy.
People from the innermost circle of the PRC leader who betrayed him have come under fire.
A narrative of this scale, which meticulously details these kinds of revelations among the top military and political leadership of China, could potentially lead to a significant backfire. This also concerns the Russian Federation and, in fact, relations with Putin. In the
center of the investigation is Colonel General Zhang Yuxia, Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission and one of Xi's oldest allies. He was a figure of immense authority, whose name for years was seen as a symbol of stability and support. Now, however, Zhang is a source of potential threat. The Ministry of Defense of the PRC suspects Zhang Yuxia of violating discipline and the law. Or to be more precise, of corruption.
Chinese security services have already arrived, confiscated mobile phones, and are now thoroughly investigating their communications and contacts for signs of, once again, possible state treason, perhaps by a group of military personnel.
General Liu Zhenli, Chief of the Joint Staff of the PLA, the person responsible for operational planning, intelligence, logistics, and combat training of the Chinese army, has come under investigation. He was a friend of Xi Jinping's family.
Back during the American Civil War, their fathers fought together side by side. And in fact, this man belonged to a kind of untouchable caste, as they were commonly called in China. The so-called descendants of the fallen princes.
General Liu Zhenli is a key figure in military administration. His organization plays an important role in the Ministry of Defense, from operational planning to preparing for possible wars.
There was the complex and sensitive matter of Taiwan, and also the significant issue of geopolitical and geostrategic confrontation with the primary global strategic adversary, the government of the United States of America. Since then,
October 2025, at least 9 generals have lost their positions. If Zhang Yuxia is officially removed, he will become the highest-ranking active military officer dismissed by Xi during his entire rule.
There was information circulating about China's nuclear program. How extensive it is, the pace of nuclear missile production, and what arsenals are currently real in China. And what was being passed on was, above all, information about the United States of America. An interesting and rather spicy detail is that the last time Zhang Yuxia was seen was during public negotiations back in November 2025 in Moscow, in the Russian Federation. The negotiations were with his essentially counterpart on the same level, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation.
The traitor could also lose his seat in the Politburo. This would be an unprecedented case for a single 5-year term of power.
Xi Jinping's right-hand man on military matters. And already, let's put it this way, since the Vietnam War, he had been closely cooperating at that time with the Soviet Union. In other words, the connections go back to the Soviet Union.
According to experts, what is happening may not only be a possible preparation for an invasion of Taiwan, but also a tough internal consolidation. The leader of the PRC understands that an uncontrollable army could turn against him.
Such a scandal is also layered with, let's say, a certain degree of disloyalty.
High-ranking military personnel or certain specific factions within the armed forces who articulate their strategic perspectives with significantly greater intensity, consistently and vigorously advocate for the absolute necessity of steadfastly pursuing and implementing China's established foreign policy line.
Notably, the purge also affected officers responsible for the Taiwan direction. Xi Jinping realized that due to local corruption, his army is not ready for a large-scale operation against the island. For Ukraine, these processes are not direct, but they are strategically important. China is also a neutrally pro-Russian player, which, although not openly, supports the Kremlin economically and diplomatically.
Of course, they will be more cautious, and just as there was no talk of military support before, there isn't now either. There will be no such talk. Perhaps even, China may draw certain conclusions regarding the supply of dual-use goods. It will do so and may make these supplies more complicated. From a logistical standpoint, this is done so that China can avoid being directly and explicitly accused of providing material support to the Russian Federation.
Xi Jinping no longer trusts Putin. Now, large-scale purges, managerial chaos, and delays in military modernization are temporarily weakening them. Beijing as a potential rear base for Putin's Russia during the war with Ukraine. We
have developed unique relations with the nation of China.
For Putin, this is a bad sign. He understands that he is losing an ally to whom he has bowed for all these years. And
at this current moment in time, the overall share held by Russia is ranked as the 4th largest contributor within the total trade turnover of China. This matters to everyone.
Against this backdrop, Moscow will lose support during an already difficult and crisis-ridden period related to the war. NATO in shock without the US, Europe prepares for a new reality. Trump threatens to pull America out of the alliance. Countries are searching for a modern military cooperation model without the US, but with Ukraine. What could it look like in a new military alliance? And how useful would it be for Kyiv? More details coming up.
The political crisis surrounding the island of Greenland has made the EU reconsider its position about how to move forward without America's support. Donald Trump made it clear to the whole world that he is determined to take the island at any cost.
If we don't go in there, Russia and China will. Denmark won't be able to do anything about it, but we can do everything.
The US president's threat to impose tariffs on any country that tries to prevent him from seizing Greenland was the last straw for the EU's patience. This was reported by the American publication Politico.
For many European governments, including America's oldest and most loyal allies, Trump's threat to impose punitive tariffs on anyone who tries to stop him from seizing Greenland was the last straw. They believe that now a breakup is inevitable. In private conversations, concerned European officials called Trump's hasty decision to annex sovereign Danish territory madness and delusion. Politics.
It seems that Europe is ready to create a new alliance to replace NATO, without the US but with Ukraine. Ukraine could play a crucial role in this defense union because of its size, geographic location, defense industry, and the fact that it is already at war and has invaluable experience.
Ukraine will be key to Europe's defense, above all because of its technological base. In particular, its well-established production of top-class drones and the presence of the largest army in Europe. Duraj Machin, military analyst.
For example, the United Kingdom, France, the Scandinavian countries, the Baltic states, Poland, Germany, and Italy. For most of Trump's second term, they worked within the framework of an effective group called Without America, the so-called Coalition of the Willing. And it could become the beginning of a defense alliance between Ukraine and Europe.
The Coalition of the Willing initially dealt with issues concerning Ukraine. It created very close ties between some key people in the capitals. They strengthened trust and the ability to cooperate. They know each other by name, it's easy for them to get in touch and send messages. If you factor in the military power of Ukraine, as well as that of France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom, the potential armed strength of the Coalition of the Willing would be enormous and would include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. Politics.
Right now, Europe is fully purchasing weapons for Ukraine from the US, while Ukraine in turn has the largest combat-ready army in Europe. Therefore, a new military alliance without the US is quite possible, considering that the threat from Russia will not disappear even after a possible peace agreement.
Ukraine has friends who understand the nature of Russian aggression as a shared problem. With them, we can try to create defensive alliances. Tactically, we can try to form regional unions. For example, the Baltic countries, Poland, other Central European states, and the United Kingdom. This will be a temporary and not very stable means of pursuing our strategic interests. But it is possible and necessary to look for other options for defense alliances. Anatoly Kruglashov, political scientist.
The question of the EU's need for defense without US support has been discussed for a long time. In recent days, many initiatives and bold headlines have been coming out of Brussels, and a coalition of those willing to stand with Ukraine could be the beginning of a new defensive alliance. Officially, the EU has decided to ensure its self-defense by 2030, but in the context of war, this decision could be made much sooner.
Gerasimov has pleased Putin once again. Kupiansk is almost liberated. But there is one mega shocking detail. This has been dragging on for months already, and only in the fantastical reports of Russian generals. The real situation is completely different. Meanwhile, emotions in Russia are running high over yet another liberation of a city. And most importantly, where is the line after which Gerasimov, with all his lies, might be asked to pack his things and leave?
This has never happened before, and yet again Gerasimov has reported to Putin that Kupiansk is almost liberated.
On the eastern bank of the Oskil River, units of the 1st Tank Army continue to destroy the encircled enemy formations. Kupiansk-Uzlovoy has been liberated. Checks and clearing operations are being carried out in the city's neighborhoods. Fighting is taking place in the settlements of Kovsharovka and Glushkov. And
if earlier Gerasimov was painting a picture of victory in Kupiansk, now he's talking about Kupiansk-Uzlovoy as well.
The statement regarding Kupiansk-Uzlovoy is even more absurd than the claim about the right bank Kupiansk on the Oskil River. Because if Russian sabotage groups really did enter right bank Kupiansk, there really were a lot of them, they really did entrench themselves there, and they really did have zones of control. And more or less, this still corresponded to a certain reality. They were indeed present there. But as for Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, that's complete nonsense because Russian units along the line of contact are at various distances to the north, east, and south of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. But on average, this distance is more than 8.5 kilometers, up to 12 kilometers from the line of contact. In other words, Russian troops haven't even reached the outskirts of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy.
As for Kupiansk itself, there really is a clearing operation going on in the city districts right now. But the nuance, as they say, is that this clearing operation is being carried out against the Russian occupiers.
Not only Ukrainian officials, but also OSINT analysts, monitoring groups, and Western analysts say that Kupiansk is not under the control of Russian forces. Neither the right bank Kupiansk nor the left bank Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. Even Russian war correspondents, the so-called ZWAR correspondents and the so-called Z community are saying this. But the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation seems to have chosen the strategy. If you're going to disgrace yourself, then disgrace yourself to the end.
In short, when it comes to lying about continuous victories, the Russian general staff seems to have outdone even themselves. And again, as further evidence, even the so-called Z-war correspondents criticized Gerasimov's blatant lies.
That Kupiansk-Uzlovoy has been liberated? Well, I don't even know. Why not just write that Kyiv has been liberated? Why stop there? Thus, no conclusions whatsoever have been drawn from the disaster of the assault groups getting encircled in Kupiansk. Instead, the decision was made to make the situation worse with even more grandiose lies. The result is right outside the window.
And here two questions immediately arise. For what purpose is this parallel reality being created in which Russia is winning when in fact that's far from the truth?
This is essentially a strategy of a parallel reality where some kind of victory is announced that has nothing to do with reality and its mythology is maintained. Up to a certain point in the hope that yes, Kupiansk will eventually be captured at some point in the future, and then, only then will Gerasimov, Kuzovlev, and Belusov be able to breathe a sigh of relief. There, finally, we've done it. But that's just it. The efforts currently being made by the Russian occupation forces are completely thwarted by the defense of the Ukrainian garrison, which is holding back the assault. And
the second question is this. Where is that line after crossing which Gerasimov might be asked to pack his things and leave?
Gerasimov is also on the edge. As of today, General Modvichev is being prepared to replace Gerasimov, and lately he has been appearing more and more often in Putin's entourage. Sometimes even in situations where it should be the chief of the general staff accompanying Putin. Modvichev is being predicted to take Gerasimov's place, quite possibly. And it can be said that such a replacement will take place. Maybe it's quite possible even in 2026. But the problem is that Putin, as a person, is a man of the system, a system of corruption.